Richard Thorne existed in a world made of glass, fragile and silent. The year since his wife Elena's passing had stretched into an eternity, each day a perfect, painful replica of the last. His sprawling mansion, once a vibrant hub of laughter and life, had become a mausoleum. Every polished surface reflected not his image, but the ghost of hers, a constant, aching reminder of a love that was now just a collection of memories. He moved through the cavernous rooms like a phantom himself, silence broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. It counted the seconds of a life he no longer felt a part of. Friends had tried to reach him, their calls and messages fading into the quiet hum of his grief. He had built walls around his heart, not out of anger, but out of a profound, paralyzing sorrow that had become his only companion. The house itself seemed to mourn with him. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight he allowed through the heavy velvet curtains, illuminating a world frozen in time. A half-finished book lay on her nightstand. A silk scarf was draped over a chair, each item a sacred relic he couldn't bear to move. His world had shrunk to the confines of these walls, a self-imposed prison where the past was more real than the present. His business empire, once his driving passion, was now managed by trusted deputies. Reports went unread, decisions were delegated. The man who once commanded boardrooms with unshakable confidence was now adrift in an ocean of loss, unable to find a shoreline. The adversity he faced wasn't a sudden storm, but a quiet, relentless tide of despair that threatened to pull him under completely, leaving nothing but an empty echo behind. The staff had dwindled, their presence a stark contrast to his solitude. The housekeeper, a kind woman who had been with them for decades, finally retired, leaving a void that felt impossible to fill. It was her departure that forced Richard to take a small, reluctant step. He needed someone to maintain the house, to keep the fragile world of his memories from crumbling into literal decay, not knowing this simple necessity would shatter his reality. The employment agency sent a replacement the following Tuesday. Richard didn't bother with the interview, leaving the details to his assistant. He heard the faint sound of a new presence in the house, a soft footstep in the grand foyer, but remained cloistered in his study. For him, it was just another shadow, another person who would never understand the depth of the void Elena had left. His despair was a private, sacred thing. Later that afternoon, needing a glass of water, he finally emerged. He walked down the long, sun-drenched hallway, his eyes fixed on the floor. As he entered the kitchen, he stopped dead. Standing by the window, arranging a vase of white lilies just as Elena used to, was a woman who stole the air from his lungs. It was her, the same dark, cascading hair, the same graceful posture, the same profile he had memorized over 20 years. For a heart-stopping moment, he believed a miracle had occurred. The world tilted on its axis, and the crushing weight of his grief was replaced by a disorienting, impossible hope. He whispered her name, Elena. The sound was a raw, broken thing in the quiet room. The woman turned, her eyes widening in surprise. And in that moment, the illusion shattered. The eyes were the same deep shade of emerald, but they held no recognition. They belonged to a stranger. This was his lowest point, a new and terrifying chapter of his sorrow. It was one thing to live with a ghost in his memories, but it was another to have one walking through his home, wearing his wife's face. The shock was a physical blow, leaving him breathless and trembling. This wasn't a comfort, it was a cruel, twisted joke played by a merciless fate, a torment far worse than the lonely silence he had grown accustomed to. The woman introduced herself as Clara, her voice soft but unfamiliar. He could barely process her words. He stumbled back, retreating to his study and locking the door. The silence he had once found suffocating was now a desperate refuge. He was trapped. Firing her immediately was the logical choice, but he couldn't. He was paralyzed by a horrifying magnetic pull, needing to understand how this impossible woman had appeared in his life. Days turned into a week, and Richard found himself in a state of suspended disbelief. He kept his distance from Clara, observing her from afar. His grief, once a passive, heavy blanket, was now electrified with a tense, burning curiosity. This was the first real emotion, other than sorrow, that he had felt in a year. It was a spark in the darkness, a reason to engage with the world, even if that world had become a surreal and disturbing puzzle. He watched as she moved through the house with an unsettling familiarity. She had a habit of humming a specific, obscure lullaby while she dusted the bookshelves. The same lullaby Elena's grandmother had taught her. She would pause at the large bay window in the drawing room, gazing out at the gardens with a wistful expression that mirrored his wife's perfectly. Each small act was another piece of an impossible mosaic. Clara seemed completely oblivious to the turmoil she was causing. She was quiet, efficient, and respectful. Her presence was both a torment and a strange, addictive comfort. Richard started to leave his study more often, not to interact, but to watch. He saw her adjust a crooked painting with the same critical tilt of her head, her fingers tracing the frame exactly as Elena's had. These were not generic mannerisms. They were intimate, specific quirks. He found himself anticipating these moments, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and fascination. Was he losing his mind? Was his grief so profound that it was projecting his wife's soul onto this innocent stranger? Or was something else at play, something far more complex and calculated? The question began to consume him, pulling him out of the stagnant waters of his mourning and into the turbulent currents of a deep, unfolding mystery. The spark of curiosity became a flame of investigation. He needed answers. The passive existence he had been living was no longer tenable. For the first time in a year, Richard Thorne had a purpose beyond simply surviving the day. He had to uncover the truth behind the woman who wore his dead wife's face, a quest that would either save him or destroy him completely. Richard's journey back to the world began not with a step into the light, but a descent into the shadows of investigation. He started with the agency that had sent Clara. He called them, his voice feigning casual interest, and asked for her file. The information was disappointingly sparse: a brief work history in cleaning services, a simple address in a modest part of the city, and no listed family. It was a blank slate. This lack of information only fueled his suspicions. He hired a private investigator, a discreet professional he had used for corporate matters in the past. The task was delicate. Find out everything about Clara, but do not let her know she is being watched. The journey to recovery for Richard was not about healing his heart, but about solving the puzzle that was consuming his mind. He needed facts to combat the chaos in his head. While the investigator dug into Clara's official records, Richard conducted his own subtle surveillance within the mansion. He started engaging her in brief, calculated conversations. He'd ask about her childhood, her hometown, her family. Her answers were always vague and simple. She spoke of growing up in an orphanage, of having no memory of her parents. Each answer was a closed door, revealing nothing but deepening the enigma of her existence. He analyzed her every move, her every word, searching for a slip, a crack in her facade. But there was none. Her innocence seemed genuine, her surprise at his intense scrutiny palpable. This only made the situation more maddening. Was she the most gifted actress in the world, or was she an unwitting pawn in a game he couldn't yet comprehend? The ambiguity was a constant, sharp-edged torment he had to endure. The initial report from the investigator confirmed what the agency file had shown. Her official life seemed to begin about 10 years ago. Before that, the trail went cold, lost in the poorly kept records of an old, now closed state orphanage. There were no birth certificates, no family ties. Clara, it seemed, had simply appeared. This dead end was not a defeat, but a sign that the truth was buried much deeper than he imagined. Frustrated by the lack of official records, Richard turned his investigation inward, to the archives of his own life with Eleanor. He spent days in the attic, surrounded by sealed boxes and the scent of aging paper. He sifted through photo albums, old letters and journals, searching for a clue, any anomaly he might have overlooked. He was looking for a ghost in his own history, a connection that could explain the ghost in his house. He found a faded photograph tucked away in a leather-bound album from Elena's college years. It showed a younger, vibrant Elena, laughing with a group of friends on a beach. But it was another woman in the background that caught his eye. A girl who looked startlingly like Elena, sitting alone on a distant bench. He had always assumed it was a trick of the light, a random stranger with a passing resemblance. Now, he wasn't so sure. This image unlocked a fragmented memory, a whisper from the past. He recalled a rare, melancholic conversation late one night years ago. Elena had spoken of a recurring dream, a dream of a sister she felt she had but could never remember. She'd called it a phantom limb of the soul. At the time, he had dismissed it as a poetic fantasy, a product of her creative mind. Now, her words echoed with chilling significance. He cross-referenced the date of the photograph with Elena's journals. He found an entry from that week, cryptic and emotional. She wrote about feeling a strange kinship with a stranger and a sadness that wasn't hers. The pieces were beginning to connect, forming a disturbing but compelling picture. The story of the Maid, who looked just like his late wife, was ceasing to be about a random lookalike and becoming something much more personal. What do you believe is the real connection between these two women? Share your theories in the comments below while we uncover the next piece of this incredible puzzle. Richard knew he could no longer rely on investigators or archives. The next clue, the next piece of the truth, was locked away inside Clara herself. He would have to confront her, not with an accusation, but with a shared history she didn't even know she had. Richard knew his next step was fraught with risk. He couldn't accuse Clara or frighten her away. He needed to approach the situation with a delicate touch. He found her in the library, carefully polishing the silver frames on the mantel. He held out the old beach photograph, his hand steady despite the frantic beating of his heart. He simply asked, "Does this woman look familiar to you?" pointing to the image of his late wife. Clara took the photograph and stared at it, her brow furrowed in concentration. Richard expected a gasp of recognition or perhaps a denial. Instead, her reaction was far more perplexing. A profound sadness washed over her face, and her eyes welled with tears she couldn't explain. "I don't know who she is," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but I feel like I've missed her my entire life." Her words hit Richard with the force of a physical blow. This was the moment the unraveling began. Her genuine emotional response was not one of deceit. It was a deep, instinctual connection that transcended conscious memory. Emboldened, Richard gently probed further, asking again about the orphanage, about any memories she had of her early childhood. She spoke of hazy, dreamlike images, the feeling of holding a smaller hand, the sound of two identical laughs echoing in a sparse room, a shared, tattered teddy bear. She recounted the story the orphanage matrons had told her, that she was found abandoned, with no name and no history. She always felt a profound sense of incompleteness, as if a part of her had been amputated before she could even form a memory of it. Her life had been defined by a question mark, a void she had learned to live with but had never truly accepted. The pain in her voice was raw and real. For Richard, her fragmented memories were like keys unlocking the final doors of the mystery. The phantom sister Elena had dreamed of, the shared teddy bear, the feeling of a missing piece, it all pointed to one unbelievable conclusion. They weren't just lookalikes. The connection between them was written in blood and sealed by tragedy. He, now knew what he had to do, not just for his own peace of mind, but for both of them. Armed with this new personal testimony, Richard focused his investigation on one specific detail: the old St. Jude's orphanage, which had closed down 2 decades ago. He used his considerable resources to track down the former director, an elderly woman now living in a quiet retirement community upstate. He knew that paper records could be lost or destroyed, but human memory, however faded, might hold the key. The meeting was tense. The former director was initially guarded, wary of a wealthy man digging into the past. But when Richard showed her the photograph of Eleanor and then a recent discreet photo of Clara, the old woman's composure cracked. She confessed a story she had held secret for over 40 years, a burden of guilt she had carried every day. The truth was more heartbreaking than Richard could have ever prepared himself for. Elena and Clara were identical twin sisters, born to a young, desperate mother who died during childbirth. Their father, a man from a prominent family, refused to acknowledge them. The infants, named Anna and Bella by the nurses, were sent to St. Jude's. They were inseparable, a single soul in 2 bodies, until they were 4 years old. That was when a wealthy, childless couple arrived, wanting to adopt a daughter. The adoptive parents were the Thorns' close friends, the couple who would raise Elena. They only wanted 1 child and insisted on taking the healthier, more outgoing of the 2. To prevent the other sister from ever disrupting their new family, a secret arrangement was made. The orphanage was paid to declare the second twin, Bella, now known as Clara, as having died from a sudden illness. Eleanor was told her sister was gone, and Clara's past was erased. The revelation was staggering. Eleanor had lived her entire life with a phantom grief she could never name, while her own sister grew up just miles away, an orphan stripped of her name, her family, and her identity. Richard's perception of his wife's life, of the people he thought he knew, was completely shattered. The mystery was solved, but it left behind the wreckage of a profound and cruel deception. Returning to the mansion, Richard felt as though he was seeing everything for the first time. The house was no longer a monument to a single lost love, but a stage for a much larger, more tragic story. He found Clara in the garden, tending to the roses Eleanor had loved. He sat with her on the cold stone bench, and with a heavy heart and gentle words, he told her everything. He told her her real name was Bella. He unveiled the truth of her birth, the existence of her twin sister Anna, who the world knew as his wife, Eleanor. He explained the cruel lie that had separated them, showing her the proof he had gathered, the former director's signed affidavit, the scant hospital records. For Clara, the information was an avalanche, burying her under a lifetime of questions that were suddenly devastatingly answered. The emptiness she always felt finally had a name. It was the absence of her other half. Her tears were not just of sadness for the sister she never knew, but also of a strange, painful relief. She wasn't incomplete, she was a twin. The story of the maid who looked just like his late wife had reached its climax, transforming from a haunting mystery into a profound human drama. Richard saw in her face not the ghost of his wife, but the living, breathing legacy of a family torn apart by secrets. His own transformation was immediate and absolute. His grief for Elena didn't vanish, but it changed. It was no longer a paralyzing force, but a motivating one. He realized his purpose was not to mourn what he had lost, but to honor Elena's memory by rectifying a terrible injustice. He looked at Clara, at Bella, and offered her not a job as a maid, but a home, a history, and a chance to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. This was a new beginning for both of them. He was no longer just a widower lost in his sorrow, and she was no longer just an orphan with no past. They were 2 people bound by an extraordinary connection to one woman, tasked with building a future from the fragments of a broken past. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, it was a path they would not have to walk alone. In the months that followed, the great silent mansion began to breathe again. The heavy, Curtains were thrown open, letting in the sunlight. Laughter, soft and tentative at first, started to echo in the halls once more. Clara, who now chose to be called Bella, explored the home not as an employee, but as an archaeologist of her own lost life. Richard would share stories of Elena, showing Bella photographs and home videos, reintroducing one sister to the other. It was a delicate and emotional process. Bella mourned the sister she never got to know, while Richard found a new way to love his wife by sharing her memory with the one person in the world who could truly understand. He helped Bella access her inheritance, the portion of her father's fortune that had been denied to her. With his guidance, she established a foundation in Elena's name to support orphans and advocate for ethical adoption practices. The mansion, once a prison of Richard's grief, became a headquarters of hope. The story was no longer about a man haunted by a look-alike, but about the resilience of family and the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. Richard's adversity was not overcome by forgetting, but by understanding his past more completely than he ever thought possible. He found a new family in the most unexpected way imaginable. The ultimate lesson was one of profound and startling hope. It taught that the human spirit has an incredible capacity for resilience, and that love can manifest in ways we can never predict. A story that began with isolating grief ended with a powerful, life-affirming connection. It showed that sometimes the answers to our deepest sorrows are not found in letting go, but in holding on to the truth, no matter how painful it is. The legacy of Elena was no longer one of absence, but of connection and second chances. Richard and Bella, united by her memory, built a future that honored her life by helping others. If this story of an unbelievable connection and the power of truth to transform our lives has moved you, please subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who appreciates the incredible mysteries of the human heart.